After yesterday's mayhem in the markets, how are you folks feeling? Bullish or bearish? Bullish? You see what that heading is? Can anybody guess what the next slide is? Okay, let me not leave you in suspense. Let's go to the next slide. So, the next slide may be surprising to many of you who know me or have known me for years. So the bear market as we know it, or as a phenomenon in markets, in my opinion, is dead. And I will, in the next 15-20 minutes, lay out the reasons why I believe so. Of course, it's presentations like these which come back and haunt you after 5 years. Because somebody would have shot it and said that, sir, you said the bear market is dead, and look, we are in the middle of a brutal bear market. So I understand the risks of taking a view as radical as this, but you will see that I have some good reasoning behind it. So let's think about markets, right? So globally, markets have been around in an organized sense for just about 100 years. Okay, I mean, the crash of 1929 is what we remember most of long-term history or historical events in the markets. So that's even less than 100 years. I mean, that's like just, 95 years. And in this 95 odd years of organized market history, we've had a few tantrums as babies throw tantrums, and which we can call bear markets. And let's take a short tour of what major bear markets we have seen in the history of the world, of the history of the stock markets of the world. We've seen actually just a handful of bear markets. And I will show you how many. It's not a lot. 1929, we all know about it, the Great Depression. The reasons for that, I mean, by the way, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 89% from peak to trough in that period. I mean, that's massive by any standards. And the reason, of course, was a huge amount of speculation. There were bank failures. I mean, there was no Federal Reserve. That's the interesting thing that was formed later. SEC was formed later. All of it was formed as a reaction of US government to the panic of 1929, which lasted up until the first 3-4 years of the 1930s. And it resulted, of course, the Great Depression, which we all know. Then, fast forward, then we had a decent run post that, and then we entered the post-World War II recession. It was not like a depression by any standard, but more like a recession. And the index decline in the DJIA was about 23%. Again, post-war, supply-side shortages caused inflation, rates were tightened, and that led to a mild recession. Not a big one, but still there was a decent fall in the markets. So you can call that a bear market. And then there was, under Dwight Eisenhower, there was a recession. Again, not a huge one, but it was again a tightening by the Fed, which led to a decline in industrial production, market correction. Fairly well understood in today's context of what might have caused that situation. Okay. And then, of course, we had the Bay of Pigs in the early 60s. I think that was 1961, 62. And, around that time, there was a lot of geopolitics, which was problematic. Russia and America were facing off in Cuba. And, again, concern over rising inflation, rising interest rates, the Cuban Missile Crisis. All of those things, again, triggered a pretty decent slide in the S&P 500, 27%. The number 5 is, of course, something like what we are seeing today, the whole Arab oil embargo following the Yom Kippur War, the Arab-Israel conflict. Of course, in Munich, we had the killings of, the athletes from Israel. It was a very problematic period. Inflation soared globally. It soared in India too. I remember that time. there were big shortages in the early 70s. Indira Gandhi was the prime minister then. We had a war of our own, which was again causing our own problems. But there was also, in the global context, a seriously problematic situation on oil. America, just was not getting enough oil because, of the oil embargo by the Arab states in protest for the war and the Israeli incursions into Gaza. Pretty much a similar script happened back then too. Huge recession globally in India. It just crushed the markets, and it was actually a pretty long bear market. It was not like a 2-3 year bear market. From the peak to trough, it was a 48% decline. But more than just the decline, it took a long time for the decline. So one is a market which declines 40%, but it does it in 1 year. The other is a decline of 40% over 8 years. That was this decline. So it lasted up until 1982. It was a very long, brutal, grinding bear market coming out of the problems of the early 70s. Then fast forward, then the bull market started in America, which was, from 1982. The Dow Jones flattened out and then started to rally. We had a fantastic 5-year period. America boomed under Reagan. The Reaganomics term came to be coined, which was very laissez-faire, very open, very right-wing thinking. That led to a huge bull market in America. Warren Buffett's career, in an investing sense, really took off from that point. So did Bill Gross, who was the bond king. Again, his career took off because interest rates had been tightened to like 16% by Paul Volcker to crush inflation. And that started to come down. And when interest rates start to come down, equity markets rally. And that struck a huge 20-year rally in both equities as well as in bonds. So in equities, Warren Buffett made his career and his reputation coming out of the 1982 bull market. And Bill Gross of PIMCO made his reputation as the bond king coming out of the decline, structural decline in interest rates, which America saw. So basically, rates declined, bonds boomed, and equities boomed too. And then that got a break on October 19th, Black Monday. Was it Black Friday? Oh, sorry, Black Monday, yeah. So, yeah, that was Black Monday. I kind of remember it. I was in my MBA at that point. The headlines was all over, the 22% decline in 1 day, which was unprecedented, up until that point anyway. And there were many theories touted around for why that happened, but best theory that I found was it was basically program trading, which is an algorithmic. That was the time when algo started to come into its own. And it was literally like a cascade of sell orders which triggered the market crash. And it was portfolio insurance was the term back then, if my memory serves me right. And that really triggered a whole cascade of selling. Of course, we had had 5 years of a bull market. Markets were poised for a correction, and we got it through, a crushing, crash in the markets following program trading. Of course, in rising interest rate, inflation were there, but it wasn't a serious reason for that bear market. It's more a technical bear market because of trading issues. And then, fast forward back from 1987, in the middle, I missed out the 1993-94, little bit of a wobble, but that was more a bond market crisis, not an equity market crisis. That's why I excluded that. That was more a surprise raise in interest rates by Alan Greenspan, which really crushed bond markets, but didn't do much, too much to equity markets. So that was eliminated. I don't count that as a bear market. The dot-com bubble was the next one. The index decline was the S&P, but the Nasdaq fell a lot more. I think it fell like 65%, which was really the main area of the carnage. The dot-com bubble was a speculative bubble, if people remember it, where we had companies, that was Internet 1.0. Amazon was born then. eBay was born then. Anybody with a website got valuations of $1 billion and more. In India, we had a lot of Internet companies coming out, raising capital. Again, very similar to what we have seen around here in the last 3-4 years. With just a website, and if you were getting some traffic, it was called eyeballs. You had a value. All of that mania went on for like 3 years from 1997 up until 2000. I remember it distinctly. I played the mania very well on the way up. I also was lucky enough to spot when it was too much. So I got out with my skin intact and my bones too. But unfortunately, it really killed the whole first wave of dot-com companies. It was a carnage. Then back to back, we had the 9/11 attack in 2001, and then WorldCom and Enron, happened around the same time, which were two big corporate frauds, giant-sized corporate frauds in America. These were storied companies, and they were found to be completely faking their accounts in every way, and their auditors were Arthur Andersen back then, which was a marquee auditor, and that led to the bankruptcy of Arthur Andersen also. So that's a bit of economic history for people who may not have been around at that time. So so that caused that bear market. And then the next one was, of course, the global financial crisis, the GFC, which was a 60% decline in the S&P 500. Bank leverage was out of control. Banks were highly levered, not only on their balance sheets, but also off balance sheet. So a lot of swaps, a lot of derivatives, all kinds of crazy financial instruments had been written by them, and suddenly, one little spark just burned down the entire barn, as they say. It collided with the subprime crisis. Many financial institutions went under. So that was the 2007-8 bear market. And then, after that, we got 2020, which was the pandemic, which the whole world shut down, and we had a massive fall of 33-34% in all indexes, including our own in India. Then, 2022, following the Russia invasion of Ukraine, we started a bear market, which was a 20% decline in the S&P 500. Again, because of supply side problems, there's conflict, oil prices went up, inflation came back up, which had been benign prior. So the Fed raised rates rapidly. We all know that. This is very recent, from 1% to 5%. That really killed the NASDAQ part, which is the more high beta part of the market. And supply lines were disrupted because of the war. So all of that contributed to the 2022 bear market. In 100 years, ladies and gentlemen, we've had only 10 bear markets, of differing intensities and differing timelines, Let's summarize now the reasons for a bear market. So excessive speculation or a bubble. That's usually reason number one, villain number one. We've seen that in 1929. We saw that in the 2000 dot-com. Even to a lesser extent, we saw that in 2007-8 when, let's say, Indian infrastructure companies were soaring on the back of very, very dodgy fundamentals. So again, kind of a bubble there. The next is wars. So the Yom Kippur War led to the oil embargo in early 70s, so that triggered a bear market. The Russia invasion of Ukraine triggered a bear market. Then inflation, monetary tightening is usually the most common theme in causing bear markets. We've seen that happen many times in the 10 examples that I gave you. Excessive leverage. We had leveraged companies in India. In 2007-8, the infrastructure was highly leveraged. That was crushed. In America or globally, banks were highly leveraged. Most investment banks were running leverages of 40 times debt to equity. By the way, I wrote an article on this in 97, 98, if I remember correctly, in Business World, pointing out exactly this problem that caused a problem 10 years later, maybe 8 years later, that the banks in the world are highly leveraged, and it's like sitting on literally dynamite when one spark can just explode this whole pile of debt. And that's exactly what happened in 2008. And then, of course, we had the pandemic in 2020, which caused a bear market. So basically, the reasons of the 10 bear markets can be summarized in 5 major themes, which is this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's pretty much it. In 100 years, we have 5 reasons to have caused 10 bear markets. Now, that's the whole point of life. That's what differentiates us from the lesser organisms, that human beings are learning organisms. We learn with each experience. We become better at dealing with complexity moment we have been exposed to that complexity. So think about it. I mean, when we were in class 1, we found, let's say, math very tough or whatever arithmetic was being taught. In class 2, the class 1 curriculum seemed super easy. In class 5, the class 4 curriculum seemed super easy. Why were we getting stressed about this? This is a piece of cake. Why? Because we had dealt with that complexity and that challenge, and our minds had expanded enough to accommodate that level of challenge. So that when the next challenge came along, we said, okay, we can deal with this. So the markets in general, or we as human beings, we have seen these 5 major reasons and challenges several times in the last 100 years, which is, several means 10 times, okay? Now let's see each of those problems, how the world has devised solutions. Because as human beings, when we are confronted with a challenge, we devise solutions. Whether it is at our individual levels, let's say you've got a health problem, you devise a solution, you work out a plan to conquer that health problem. It could be diabetes, could be heart attacks, or whatever it is, right? If we have a problem, we should find and we will find solutions. Let's see how the world has found the solutions to each of those causes. So speculation, big problem, big reason for causing crashes. Now see, today, worldwide, we don't see the same level of craziness in markets as we used to back in 2000, back in 1929, back even in 2007-8. Now bull markets are more rational in terms of valuation. For example, our markets have done phenomenally well. But to the best of my last data point, we are trading 22 times earnings on the Nifty. Okay, there will be pockets of over-exuberance like the SME or small caps. That's okay. I'm talking large, big blocks or more systemic. You don't see the kind of euphoric valuations that existed in 2000. Even, for example, in US tech, okay, which is the, let's say, the pinnacle of overvaluation, the big tech companies remain or have remained extremely reasonably valued. I mean, NVIDIA, which has been a huge winner in the last 2 years, still, after all the euphoria, and it is like a 800-pound gorilla in the AI chip space, it's just about 60, 70 times earnings, which is nothing compared to what might have been 20 years ago. Most of your Facebooks and Amazons and Googles are all have traded, or Meta, traded between 12, 18, 20 times earnings. I mean, for tech stock with those kinds of franchises, unheard of low multiples. World has we have become wiser at not overpaying for even very good companies with the kind of moats that exist. Banking crisis, like we saw in 2007-8, or for that matter in 1929. So after 1929, the Federal Reserve and the SEC were formed, which brought some semblance of sanity. After nearly 88, 90 years, we had a banking crisis again in America and the world. Then Paul Volcker's, he got into the act, and then they imposed very strict capital requirements and proprietary trading cuts and curbs on the investment banks and the commercial banks in America. And of course, that's been implemented worldwide. So again, we have devised solutions so that we do not have the same problem. And let's say in India we had a 1991 Forex crisis. We all know about it. Since then, no matter which government has come to power, our single biggest focus is that we should not run out of Forex or foreign exchange. We don't want to ever reach that situation. Our overarching policy measures have been to hoard Forex so that our reserves are more than sufficient to cover for any problem. You see, that's how we have learned from 91 crisis. That's how the world has learned from the banking crisis of 2007-8. Inflation, again, the world has worked out better supply chains. And of course, because of better manufacturing practices, worldwide, the product part of the world in terms of consumption has declined in pricing over time. Adjusted for inflation, the price of a car is lower today for the average car than what it used to be 20 years back, because of far better manufacturing practices, far better access to supply chains, better supply chains. So the world has become more efficient. in order to drive down inflation, which has been the single biggest contributor to bear markets worldwide. And of course, we also need to understand that the markets have understood that inflation is not a permanent problem, at least not in civilized parts of the world. It's a temporary problem. And why is it temporary? Because inflation reduction is only an optical method, that it's a rate of change that is reduced. It's never the absolute price that is reduced. You see, $100 becomes 120 for anything, let's say this remote control. That's a 20% inflation in a year. If that goes to 130 the next year, that's 10 over 120. So let's say it is 8%. So the central banks are going to say, you know what, now we have brought down from 20% the rate of inflation to just 8%. That's nonsense. We know that. For us as consumers, we want the price to go back to 100. It will never go back to 100. Only the rate of change keeps declining. So even at 150, 4 years out, they will say now it is just 3%. But you know what? I was paying 100 for this 4 years back. I'm paying 150 for this now. And you're telling me it's all good and inflation is under control. So basically, it is a game of smoke and mirrors played by central banks to keep people happy that now inflation has been curbed. But it's not been curbed. The 100 became 150. But the world lives in, 99.99% of the people don't understand this. And that's what helps governments, leaders, and policymakers to keep us as stupid as possible. So inflation is easily conquered. It's a temporary problem. The data points keep scrolling, and therefore the next data point in percentage terms has risen less than the previous data point. And that's what's going to happen in America also, that the next data points will look optically in terms of rate of change less. So they will say, great, we have conquered inflation. We all know it's all nonsense. Wars, we have become very comfortable with wars. Right now, we have 2 major wars going on and nobody seems to be bothered. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day and, in Dubai, Iran, if I take a boat, it's just 90 miles from where I stay. That's it. And yet we are partying every night, like there is no war or there's no threat or there's nothing. Back in the day, 1971 war against Bangladesh and Pakistan, I used to see the fighter aircraft going on top, and there used to be sirens, and we used to black out our, turn off our lights as per government directives. Today, there's nothing. We are all happy. Markets, most importantly, don't seem bothered at all. Even in Russia and in Israel, where the center of the war lies, there has been no problem. Markets have been rallying even in those countries. Forget about the rest of the world. So generally, markets have become comfortable with wars. They don't care. They know it's a matter of time before people will step in and resolve the problem. Oil, think about it. We have had huge crisis in the Middle East. Look at oil. 70, 72. It should have been 150 back in the old days. See, we become better at dealing with this kind of crisis. We know temporary problem, no point in panicking, okay? So the reactions have become far more mature of markets to even crazy crises like what we are seeing in the Middle East right now. Pandemic, we found a solution within 6 months to a problem that we had never seen prior. No blueprint of that kind of a pandemic. 6 months later, we had a solution. So that's the point. And by the way, even in that crazy pandemic, the entire bear market lasted for 1 month. Just 1 month. It was over 30% fall, 1 month, boom, finished. So that's the point. We have understood this one basic fact, that these 5 villains that I outlined in the 10 movies that we have seen, horror movies in the last 10 years, they always die. There is no villain that survives our ingenuity as human beings in conquering them. So now we know broadly 5 reasons hai. We are comfortable. War, no problem, solved. Pandemic, solved. Inflation, we'll deal with it. Banking crisis, probably not happening of that order again. Speculative bubbles, probably no chance of that kind of systemic bubble. So what's left to cause a bear market? And so like I said here, we have the Pran, the Prem Chopra, the Gulshan Grover, Dr. No, all these great villains in movie history. We have dealt with them, we have solved them, we have killed them in the end. So the hero, which is the bull market, always wins, always wins. Except if you have a new villain. So remember, Sholay was a great movie not because of Sanjeev Kumar or because of Amitabh Bachchan or Dharmendra. It was because we found this crazy guy who came out of the blue and became an iconic villain. And they had a tough time putting him down. But in the end, even he got neutered. He was taken away by the cops. So even an Amjad Khan was conquered. So if an Amjad Khan could be conquered, I see no reason why we cannot conquer any villain in a quick enough time to not cause any structural bull market. What we are going to get from here on will be corrections, but not bear markets. Bear markets mean 30, 40, 50% declines in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. I don't think we are ever going to see that kind of situation. Except again, if we get a nuclear war, in that case, anyway, we are all dead. It doesn't matter. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.